An American M2 Bradley IFV taking out Russia's most modern MBT, Russia's most modern tank, a T-90M in Avdiivka, as well as the apparent lack or a shortage of air defense missiles on the Ukrainian side. We'll talk about this as well as about troop generation, political circumstances, an American Chilean dying in a Ukrainian prison, and other things in the situation report. We'll start off on the Eastern Front line in the north. Here we have Ukrainian mill bloggers writing that the Russians have started to clear mines in the area, which would indicate both at Sinkivka as well as in Ivanivka in this region here, it would indicate that we should expect more intense Russian attacks in the near future. Syrsky, the Ukrainian ground forces commander, also said that in the direction of Liman, which is basically west of Crimea, there's also, the Ukrainians have also observed mine clearing efforts, which would again indicate that there are bigger columns coming fairly soon. Both were also talking, both the Ukrainian mill bloggers as well as Syrsky were talking about reserves that are arriving in Crimea as well as in the northern part of the front line. So we should see a renewed offensive by the Russians here. On the Eastern Front, south of the Seversky Donetsk, we have a small change in territory here at Vesele. More or less, this area here was captured by the Russians. We have a geolocalization here that is, here you can see Vesele, and basically they have been spotted on this part of the front line. They moved the front line forward a couple of 100 meters. I think it was 300 meters. No major change here, but some movement along the front line. But that was already it in the overall bigger Bakhmut area. I cannot confirm, I cannot observe any change in, for instance, Bodanivka, Hromove, Klishivka or Andrivka. No changes in territory here, even though fighting about these areas is obviously still continuing. Further south in Avdiivka, we have a video of a fight between American-made M2 Bradley and a Russian T-90M, which is worth watching. So we see this here was a T-90M just shooting. I'm trying to explain it to you because the video is not of the greatest quality. This is the M2 that actually pops up and realizes, oh my God, there's a tank right next to me. So you see him opening fire, and he immediately basically calls it and runs away, which in this situation means, let me turn off my camera so you can see it better here. He's retreating in the south here. This is still the tank moving now further to the north. And now we see a second Bradley coming from this area here. It's coming down here. I have no idea, to be honest, what this is. This seems to be like an incendiary round or something like this going off here. It's definitely not. It doesn't look to me like smoke grenades by the tank because the smoke produced is also far too low for it. Now we see the second Bradley coming up and it's opening fire. By the way, the video is 5 times the speed. That's why it's rather fast. And what we see now is we see the small flashes here when you see it. Yeah, in this area. I think at this point the Bradley is firing APDST on the T-90, which are like armor piercing. And in a moment now you see explosions happening. I think now he has switched to HEIT, high explosive incendiary. As you can see, the detonations, the effect on the tank that is being under pressure at this point. The Bradley is still firing at it, and it's also nice to see that you can see him moving back and forth, doing the Saga dance, basically trying to be harder to hit while still offensively engaging the MBT from a short distance of, what is that, 250 meters, maybe 300 yards more or less. The tank is being hit again and again, and this at the point here seemed to have been itself shooting, even though the flash is fairly small, but it's right south of it, so it might have been that the tank itself shot at this point. As said, the video unfortunately isn't of the greatest quality. Now the Bradley is retreating, and we see it zooming in here, and there you can see while the tank is still, you have fire at the front, and the tank is still mobile, but the turret is circling around and around and around. I think the most likely reason here is that the APDS actually penetrated the tank. That is possible from the side and from the rear, is on the turret as well, and that the crew here, at least the crew inside of the turret, might have been taken out or heavily wounded, and thus leading to the circulation. Obviously, it could be an electronic issue as well, that one of the modules that controls it was taken out, but the turret was turning uncontrollably while the driver was driving here and crashing into something. We don't see the tank exploding here right now, and as the Bradley only has a 25mm autocannon, the Bushmaster, its effect inside of the tank as soon as it has penetrated it is somewhat limited, which would explain why the tank itself wasn't destroyed, even if the APDST had penetrated it at that point. So it's unclear as of now. The very least we see is a mission kill. There are some claims that later this tank is being seen destroyed, so the Russians either died on board and then were taken out later, or they evacuated, died on board, and then the tank blew up later, probably by a Ukrainian attack, or they evacuated the tank and then it was blown up later. But here we see a clear example of a mission kill. The Bradley itself was not outright capable of taking out the tank, but it was still worth shooting at it, even with an autocannon that can nominally not penetrate its frontal armor, because taking out all the optics, taking out, giving the explosions, the shaking of the explosions can still damage electronics, and thus while the crew might survive, in this case, my expectations would be that crew damage was done, but as said, that's speculation. In this circumstance, we see that the tank was still taken out. This was an example here from the fighting here at Avdiivka, where Bradleys are being used by the Ukrainians in the defense of Avdiivka, and in regards to the defense, they are mostly successful. We can again confirm some minor Russian advances, but they stay minor. Here south of the water treatment plant, they have now reached that road, so they more or less advanced a few hundred meters in this direction. But this is in the northeastern part, the only change that I can confirm. I have a Ukrainian mill blogger also confirming an additional loss here of a small strip in Pervomaiske, which would be more or less an area here where the fighting was happening over the last few days as well, where we had Ukrainian counterattacks in this regard to keep the lines of communication open. So we see minor advances by the Russians, but no bigger changes. Ukrainian military bloggers are expecting again a massive new wave of Russian attacks. They expect them to happen northwest of the coke plant, which is here. So more or less Stepove, maybe between the coke plant and Stepove, with the obvious attempt to encircle Avdiivka and the coke plant and not having to go through the house-to-house fighting, or at the very least either fully encircle it or achieve a turning maneuver forcing the Ukrainians to withdraw from it. We'll have to see how far this will succeed, how this will play out. We'll obviously accompany it here on the channel, so if you don't want to miss it, then I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Let's go further south here in the area of Marinka and Vuleda. At Novomikhailivka, we have additional fighting in the area. There are fresh claims of the Russians having advanced further to the west. I have no confirmation of this. Then there are some Russian claims that they advanced closer to this here. I cannot confirm anything freshly here either. So the fighting for Novomikhailivka is continuing, but as of now, at least, I cannot confirm any significant change in this area. Further west at the Oblast border, we have fresh fighting for Staromayorsk. The Russians attacked it again. There was some lull in the fighting here for a couple of weeks, and now we have renewed attacks towards Staromayorsk. But once again, I cannot confirm any change in territory. What I do confirm in change in territory is somewhere here, though, west of Verbove. The Russians attacked and achieved a success in probably roughly 2 kilometers width and 550 meters in depth in this area, where they pushed the Ukrainians further to the west away from Verbove. On the Dnipro, we have a Russian advance, a Russian incursion, we could probably call it, in Krinky being recorded. This is here on Telegram, and it's being geolocalized here. And this is it's not that easy to find in comparison to the deep state map, but we see the road here moving around, and that's interesting because this should be this part here. So the Russians have been inside until here in this area. The video though shows them being attacked and being taken out, the video I've seen. So in this regard, I'm not completely sure whether they managed to advance further. Any other geolocalization I found was further to the east, either up here or somewhere in this area, where at least with the deep state map, we more or less consider it to be under Russian control anyways. There might have been an incursion in the area that was more or less secured by the Ukrainians in Krinky here, but whether the Russians managed to succeed fortifying themselves, they're holding their territory, is obviously a different story. A Ukrainian spokesperson for this area of the front line was saying the attacks are now getting smaller and are reduced in strength because the Russian ran out of Storm Z units. Those are the convict recruits that are being sent more or less as full cannon fodder, and what is left is naval infantry and VDV, and they are less wasted in frontal attacks than those others. And as the others apparently ran out, at least according to the Ukrainians, the attacks are now less intense in this area. The Ukrainians are reporting though that there have been attacks with ballistic missiles in this area too. In the context, it seems to have been that the attacks were it's unclear which missiles. There was some speculations whether it was Iskander. It could have been S-300 and S-400 as well. And they seem to have been used in a tactical point, so striking military positions here in this area. At least that's what I read out of the context. I might be mistaken here, though. In general, we have Ukrainian voices, again, expecting offensives at several parts of the front line. We already talked about... Excuse me, we already talked about Kupiansk, we talked about Liman, we talked about Avdiivka, but there are also claims that Chasiv Yar will be a target in the near future. Obviously, Chasiv Yar is the next thing to reach west of Bakhmut after Ivanivske, and Ukrainian voices expect a significant Russian offensive towards Chasiv Yar in the coming days. At the same time, the Ukrainians are also saying that the Russians are continuing to build up their defenses in Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia, which would then be more or less here in the south towards the Azov Sea. And we have videos of the Ukrainians actually doing the same. And this is here. And this is interesting in a regard that we see fortification work. Let me make this a little quicker, because we see heavy works. We see this is probably for trenches that are reinforced here with wood, with metal nashes that have coverings behind it. We see military personnel talking to the workers. But what is interesting in this regard is that we see how the Ukrainians are building their Dragon Teeth fortifications. Now they are using them as well, but we see them not only connected, as you can see clearly here, which is one of the points to make it more stable and more effective. But we also see barbed wire being used over it, which has been surprisingly absent along the front lines. Now we do now and then see it, but despite the front line not moving too much, there's actually fairly limited availability for pictures of barbed wire being used. And we can see it's not that it's obsolete. At least we see the Ukrainians still using here. And here you can also see the situation they are in. Now this is what this is regular barbed wire, not what we would call NATO wire. So the version for military purpose, this actually looks like regular barbed wire for cow pastures in this regard. On today's air attack this morning, the Ukrainians were reporting that they were struck by 37 missiles and 3 drones, but they were only able to intercept 8 of the missiles. This is happening roughly a week after the Ukrainians said that they are running short on air defense missiles and have to start rationing them, and we can clearly see the effect of that. Russia has apparently managed to deplete Ukraine's stockpile to a certain degree, so they have to reduce their their defense against Russian attacks, which obviously makes them far, far more effective. At the same time, the Ukrainians are saying that they managed to defeat 20 of the missiles with electronic warfare. And here we have to talk about the context in about strikes in civilian targets. Obviously, a missile that was aimed at a military target, if it's being led astray with electronic warfare, it still will probably crash somewhere in the ground and cause an explosion. And that could be part of why the Russians hit civilian targets all over Ukraine. It's not that I would consider the Russians to be particularly picky when it comes to their target, and that they would suddenly, or that I would accuse the Russians of taking really care not to hit civilians. But in the context of the limited supply of Russian long-range strike capability, it never made sense to me that the Russians would then strike civilian apartment complexes unless they expect there to be a military value, not because they value Ukrainian citizens so much, not because they don't want to harm civilians, but simply because it's a waste of resources. If you only have a limited amount of missiles, you don't shoot them blindly into civilian towns. Obviously, mistakes happen, but this could also be an explanation that electronic warfare simply lets them astray, and thus they have to strike something else. And if the Russians attack a target in the center of a city, then obviously the missile might hit just something else inside of that city. So this could be an explanation for those events, at least to some part, even though, again, I'm not far away from wanting to claim that the Russians take good care of not harming civilians. I think we've seen enough proof that the Russian tolerance, let's put it very friendly, that the Russian tolerance for civilian losses is fairly high. In troop generation, we have some information as well. We have here about the an article from Sky News, according to which there's a new attack drone on the way to the front line. It's supposed to be the Shahid 107 that is freshly developed. But the information isn't completely clear in this regards, because this is supposed to show it. There are some claims that it can strike targets, even though this looks more like a reconnaissance item. And if we take the translation here, then it would have 20 kilometers of payload, and it would be able to strike here ammunition. It would be able to strike something as well. Other claims were that it's supposed to lead other drones into their targets. So not completely clear yet. It seems that this is maybe a multi-role drone, but we see Iran supplying Russia with fresh drones. The goal of those is supposedly to hunt HIMARS, so they want it to be able to loiter around and either probably then ram itself into a HIMARS, or at least guide others into it. So this would be an application, an adjustment, let's put it better this way, an adjustment to the threat the Russians are facing, as there is up until now not a single proof of the Russians having actually hit a HIMARS, even though they claimed a lot of them. I haven't seen single proof of one of them actually being hit as of now. And while they are causing huge losses to the Russians, they are obviously a big pain in their butt, so they try to do something against it. According to the US, Iran is also shortly ahead. I think it's also in this article here from Sky News. According to them, Iran isn't far away from delivering short-range ballistic missiles. Now, Iran wanted to wait until a ban for exports from the Security Council, UN Security Council, ran out, but then the war in the Middle East started. So Iran probably tried to rather see if they are going to need their own ballistic missiles in the near future, and now apparently they think the situation is stable enough to allow them to export some of their missiles towards Russia so they can use them against Ukrainian targets. The GUR, the Ukrainian intelligence agency, is saying that 462,000 men are in Ukraine, Russian soldiers. Russian combat units are filled up mostly to 92 to 95%, so close to being fully filled up. And the Russians have enough personnel to be able to rotate. Usually they wait until the troops are down to 50%, according to the GUR, and then they send them in the back for R&R, for rest and recuperation, and to replenish them. This must lead us to the conclusion that despite all the claims. Russia, at least for the moment, seems to have its personnel needs somewhat under control. It is apparently able to fulfill its needs without a second wave of mobilization, despite, for instance, Igor Girkin, who is in prison, but still commenting on all of it, and the letters are being sent out and published by others. He has just written a new letter, and according to Igor Girkin, one of the, we could even say, main causes of this war, Igor Girkin said that Russia will need a second wave of mobilization because the situation is too dire as of now. At least we can see if the GOR is right. The situation is, at least for the moment, somewhat under control, but the Russians are trying to keep this under control for longer. The Duma is right now considering a law that would allow foreigners with priors to join the military as well. Right now, it's only legal for locals, for Russian citizens. If they have prior convictions to join the Russian military, this would allow foreigners to do so as well. The GOR was also saying the Russians are now producing did produce 2 million shells for 152 and 122 millimeter grenades a year. In 2023, they had a deficit of 500,000. So according to the estimates of the GOR, the Russians would have needed 500,000 more. But obviously, Russia is able to fulfill that gap to some degree, at least with purchases. The claim was that North Korea has already delivered 1 million shells, which would then account for 2 years excess need in this regard. Still, though, the GOR is saying the quality of the shells is diminishing because of the Russian efforts to increase production. Obviously, quality can't keep up with the production, and the Ukrainians are claiming that they already can see the diminishing quality, which would then probably be a reduced accuracy and higher dud rate. The Russians are now saying that they are testing drones that use a homing function. So basically, the pilot of the FPV drone would identify a target and then create a target lock of the drone. After that, the drone itself takes over control and rams itself into it. This would obviously diminish the value of electronic warfare significantly, as the drone no longer really needs a contact with its pilot after the target is locked. The pilot have to be less trained. The pilots have to be trained less well, as they don't have to be able to be masterful flyers to hit it, especially with a moving target. So this should make the drones much more efficient if the Russians are right. There's a minor Ukrainian channel that I found on the ISW that claimed that they are already in use. I don't know this channel, so I can't say whether they are already in use, but this is something that we were to expect. We already saw a video, I think I showed it to you on this channel roughly a month or two ago, where it clearly showed a Russian drone having a target lock. This is some development that was to be expected. Also, obviously, this means that the range will be increased as ground clutter, I think is the word. So basically, items at the bottom, at the ground, be it trees, be it houses, can hinder the communication with the drone. Also, at longer distances, obviously, hills and items like this will also play a role. The drone has to have either a direct line of sight with its pilot or at least with a relay station. Now, if the drone can fly higher and this will allow the drone to keep in contact with its pilot for longer, and after the target lock is achieved, it can simply dive down and hunt it for itself. So the range of those drones would also be an additional problem on top, another issue which the Ukrainians will have to face. But this isn't even all. The Russians are now showing a new glide bomb. This is the FAB 1500 M54. This is actually a 80-year-old aerial bomb from the Soviet Union, but it is now changed with the UMPK gliding kit, as we can see here. It's able to be dropped from planes and then glide at longer distances. It also has received a new cone to increase its aerodynamics and thus allowing it for longer range. The bomb itself has 675 kilos of explosives, and it supposedly is able to be dropped from 16,000 meters at a speed of 1,200 kilometers an hour, which would give it a massive range, as the speed and the altitude are what determines the range for a glide bomb, after all, as it doesn't have its own propellant. There are some claims on the Russian military blogger sphere that claim a range of 70 kilometers or more. I'm not completely sure. We'll have to see what has been proven, and this is far beyond my competence to be able to judge this according to some data I find somewhere, and we don't even see how long the wings are in this and how aerodynamically good all of this is done. Like, this is far beyond my pay grade to judge how far the range will be, but obviously the huge amount of explosives will cause significant problems, as even fairly close misses will still be devastating. And another sign maybe of recruitment is a very weird message. The Ukrainians said that there was recently a fresh prisoner exchange, and they handed over 248 Russian soldiers, 180 of those, so the majority, were former prisoners. So they were convict recruits in prison for murder, for kidnapping, for rape, for robbery, for heavy crimes. A lot of them were career criminals, and Russia apparently asked to receive those back. This is interesting because maybe this Russia believes that they can force them easier to go back to the front line. I'm not completely sure about this, how to read it out of this, but this seemed to be remarkable that Russia seems to put a focus on criminals to get them back, not on regular Russian citizens that just served in the armed forces. In the political sphere, the ISW has reported that the Ministry of State Security of Transnistria, which is considered to be a department, more or less a foreign department of the FSB, the Russian intelligence agency FSB, this Ministry of State Security in Transnistria, the breakaway region of Moldova, is increasingly talking about provocations by Moldova, including supposed training of saboteurs through Moldovan special forces that are prepared to blow up things inside of Transnistria. This is being interpreted as an information war campaign that might later then justify a Russian intervention. I'm not completely sure, because Transnistria would be mad to enter the war as of now, as even under pressure, the Ukrainian armed forces should make short work of Moldova, of the Transnistrian breakaway region, if they enter the war themselves. And that Moldova is actually preparing to invade it seems to be seems to be fairly unlikely, as its military is nowhere capable of doing this, and Moldovan government has consistently said that this issue will be solved with peaceful means. Nevertheless, we'll have to see how it develops. Then there's also the news that Gonzalo Lira has died in a Ukrainian prison. Gonzalo Lira was a Chilean-American dual citizen, a blogger, video editor. I think he shot videos as well. You can find the article about him himself. Now, he became famous in this context for his videos from Ukraine. And here I have to openly admit, I don't really know much about him. I watched 3 of his videos, which were full of blatant lies, pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian. He claimed, for instance, that everyone, before the war, he claimed that everyone with an IQ above 90 would know that Russia would never invade Ukraine. He claimed that the war is already over a week into the war, and that the Russians take good care of not killing civilians, things like this, he said, but I didn't follow him too much. I watched his 5 videos, I think, before he tried to flee Ukraine into Hungary, before he was arrested. Now, there are claims, numerous claims, of espionage, of torture against him. So he did espionage for the Russians, or he was tortured. There are numerous claims, but the fact is, I don't know. I was not able, and I'd never had the time, and I was honestly never interested in checking it out, whether I've never read the indictment against him. I've never seen proof of anything. I haven't seen proof of him being tortured. I haven't seen proof of him doing espionage for the Russians. So as of now, I can't really say much. So I won't say any more than this, then that he has died, and that he is very well connected, that he was very well connected and very appreciated by the pro-Russian observer community. He called himself to, if he ever stops posting that he's going to be a victim of the Ukrainian regime and things like this. Whether he was actually killed in prison or not, I have no idea. So let's just leave it at this. But I guess as he has some notoriety, not mentioning him at all would have been wrong as well. Ukraine and the United Kingdoms have signed a security pact, and Zelensky is comparing it to US commitment to Israel. So from the Ukrainian side, it's being interpreted as a massive future aid by the UK, which has also promised a new sizable military aid package that we'll talk about later in this episode. The Russian Orthodox Church has thrown out a priest because he didn't want to pray for the Russian military and the Russian war. This is the state of the Russian Orthodox Church now. I said like a year ago or so that Kirill, who was a KGB agent before before the fall of the Soviet Union, Kirill actually promised heaven and martyrdom to everyone, to Russian soldiers fighting in this war. This was a cultural break with history, as the Orthodox Church has always refused to follow the concept of a holy war that the Catholic Church had followed in the Crusades. And this was one thing that the Byzantine emperors were always begging the Orthodox patriarchs to please promise something comparable to a crusade and to the effects of a crusade. So washing away all sins and entering heavens if you fight the disbelievers, and they always refused this. Now the Russian Orthodox Church has changed this after over a millennia, probably a cultural break with history in unbelievable dimensions that the majority have simply ignored. And we see it here again. A priest is being fired for not praying for war. In troop generation, Ukraine-wise, we have the Ukrainian parliament has declined a new law for mobilization. They said, though, that in principle they are willing to fulfill the demands of the military, but some of the regulations are supposedly against the human rights. There were reduction of conscription age and a lot of other things that would be changed. One of the things would also be that the punishment for refusing to fight would have been changed, so probably made it more drastic. And the interesting part was that this law would have meant that there's an upper limit for fighting in the war at 36 months. Right now, there is no limit. Right now, legally, the Ukrainian government can pull in soldiers, can mobilize personnel and leave it on the front line for 25 years. This was supposed to change to 36 months, meaning 3 years. But as of now, it's declined. But they will renegotiate, even though there is no date yet when that law is then supposed to be decided again. And we can talk about international support. The UK has promised £2.5 billion. That should be more or less $3 billion. The special focus on that will be drones for the military. We have we also have Canada that has promised, even though that's less fortunate, we have Canada promising a air defense NASAM system, which was never delivered. One of the two companies said we didn't even receive a contract. So that's going to be interesting. Lithuania has promised 200 million in military aid, which is equivalent to 0.3% of the GDP. This package alone. Latvia has promised also a new aid package with howitzers, 155mm shells, anti-tank weapons, missiles, grenades, ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, helicopters and drones. In total, 1.2 billion euros, 24 to 27, equivalent to 0.25% of GDP. And the British package that I already mentioned also includes air defense system, long-distance weapons, I guess more Storm Shadows, artillery shells, and as said, 200 million for drone production. Some of it obviously is going to be inside of the UK. In total, Lithuania, Latvia, and the United Kingdom also all said that they will try to work with the Ukrainian defense industry, so they should receive some benefits from that as well, either technology transfer or aid in production, maybe abroad as well. Ukraine wants to produce 1 million drones in 2024. Which would be equivalent to 81,000 a month. Right now, they are producing only 50,000 a month. So we see that while 1 million sounds a lot, it's actually not that massively away from what they claim to currently produce. And from the US, there's nothing coming. The US said they are not going to send anything at all until Congress has passed a new aid package, and this is currently being held up as the leadership of the Republican Party demands a explanation how the path to victory or what strategy the US government and the Ukrainian government are following. Anders Spook Nielsen has made a video about this, which just came out a few minutes ago. While I wouldn't agree completely with him, it still shows, explains the situation really well. I think maybe maybe Mike Johnson interprets strategy somewhat different, as basically we want to know what goal they want to achieve and how before we supply them with the means, but he explains what in military terms strategy means and how it interacts and how Mike Johnson plays a role in what Ukraine can even define as strategy. As usually from him, a very watch-worthy video. We also have some pictures here, a video from Ukraine that shows a new Ukrainian Leopard 1A5 in its winter clothing. As you can see, with winter camouflage, the Ukrainians have started using the Leopard 1 now. And here we see a picture of a German Marder IFV. And as it's interesting here, it's a CSUAS. It's a, what we can see here is a device to basically jam drones that are aiming on that system to strike it. Just some pictures to finish up today's episode, because that was already it from now. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel, and that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.